Welcome to the G5 Hive, our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. Today, we'll be taking a look at the San Diego State Aztecs, who finished 4-8 last season. They wrapped up their 2024 spring practice with their spring game on April 20th. We have a special guest joining us today. He is a teacher, he is a writer and content creator for East Village Times, where he covers the San Diego State Aztecs. He is Paul Garrison. Paul can be found at Padre de Cuatro on X. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you, man. What a great video, great intro. It's exciting, man.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got to covering the Aztecs, and how long you've been covering the team?
Well, I think as you mentioned, I am a school teacher. I teach social science history at a local high school here in San Diego. And one of the things that if you study history is a really remarkable kind of component about just American history is the number of newspapers that used to exist. Local media, it's staggering. Like, just do yourself a deep dive. It's staggering the amount of newspapers there used to be. And as you know, through the television age, internet age, a lot of these newspapers kind of became part of big, huge corporate conglomerates who, own a whole bunch of the different ones. And so in seeing that, I just have a belief in local media. I think there is the ability to cover something when your feet are on the ground and you are not beholden to a certain way of having to write, a certain way of having to cover something, but you can do it in kind of that old school, like historical way of being able to cover it. So during COVID, the opportunity came up to start writing for the East Village Times. And I've just stuck with covering San Diego State athletics. And, we've been credentialed, that whole time and was sitting courtside at the Final Four when Lamont Butler hit the game-winning shot, send San Diego State to the national championship. It's just been a great opportunity to do that. And this is, I think, 2020 was the first year. So whatever this makes this one coming up, and we're excited. There was the first press conference today that Sean Lewis was able, where we're recording on the day that we're recording. And so pretty exciting times.
Well, speaking of Sean Lewis, San Diego State's head coach Brady Hoke retires. In comes Sean Lewis. He was previously the offensive coordinator at Colorado. Before that, he was the head coach at Kent State. What can you tell us about Coach Lewis and what he brings to the table for the Aztecs on and off the field?
Well, I think the biggest maybe kind of contrast between him and Coach Hoke, Coach Long before that, is kind of their philosophies on the field, right? The way in which the former philosophies was they were going to eat the clock, play sound defense, try to win the game in the fourth quarter. And they were very successful with it. And I think that there is a question of if are they kind of throwing out the baby with the bathwater by being as successful, more successful than they've ever been at the Division I level for the last 15 years. And the reality is Sean Lewis is very similar to Brady Hoke, to Rocky Long, in terms of their philosophy, in terms of their physicality, in terms of the things that they value in the way that they want to develop people and do things from, the high school ranks up and et cetera. So I think there's a lot of commonality that way. But I think what Sean Lewis has done is he's really energized the fan base. But what Sean Lewis has really done is he has brought kind of a PR mindset that was lacking from the previous head coaches, and he has brought that to the university. And so, like, his ability and his way of being able to get out in front of the media, get out in front of the fans, share the exciting message of what San Diego State football, what the vision is. I think that's what he's done. And then I think San Diego State has a long history of offensive first football, and I think fans are very excited about that possibility again. Even when San Diego State was finishing in the top 25, they were getting the NCAA's all-time leading rusher Donnell Pumphrey was on the Mesa. The crowds weren't what you would expect them to be, but when they had balanced offenses, when they were able to pass the ball, there were times, my dad tells me, who was an alumni of San Diego State back in the 70s, they were outdrawing the Chargers because Don Coryell was the coach and they were throwing the ball all over the place and people were excited about it. So I think they're trying to take the best of Rocky Long and the best of Brady Hoke in terms of their philosophy, in terms of who they are, in terms of how they want to develop people and give these student athletes a great experience at San Diego State, while also having the sides that they lack, which was that connection with the fans, because they have an exciting offense and more of to that modern feel that people look at when they see college football around the country. For many years, it seems like San Diego State was kind of like in a time lapse.
Well, speaking of exciting offenses, can you describe the type of offense that Coach Lewis plans to run there at San Diego State for folks that might not be familiar with Coach Lewis? I think the term is what, Aztec Fast. Is that what they're calling it?
Yeah, and and they had whatever, they had Buffalo Fast, and then they had the Flash offense at Kent State. So it's not a new moniker; it's what he does, what Sean Lewis does. So I think what they're going to try to do is they're going to spread out the field, and they're going to try to win the numbers game like all spread offenses, right? They're going to try to make the defense have to kind of commit at the line, and they're going to try to play the numbers wherever those are. I think one of the aspects that is a little bit unique, if you remember the offenses that Baylor used to run, that's really where the tree is, and that's the roots of where that is. Lanier Sampson, who's their wide receivers coach, was a wide receiver at Baylor, so he's been in the system, had huge success down in Texas for them. And so what they're going to try to do is they're going to try to be able to vary their tempo, change formations like crazy, but all with the same personnel. So the defense will not have time to be able to run new people onto the field. And the idea is that it does a couple of things. One, it forces the defense to play vanilla, because if they're going to have so many, you're not going to be able to do a bunch of blitzes because you don't know what they're going to line up in the next scheme, and they're going to snap it like this. So that's one aspect of it. I think another aspect of it is there's just mistakes that are made. People, in that processing time, the offense should have an advantage over the defense always in being able to set what's happening. And if you're snapping the ball quicker, there's more likely there's going to be an assignment error. There's going to be those things that take place. I think the other piece of it that is a little bit of if you look back at those, a little bit of a people mischaracterize it and misunderstand it. This is not a pass first offense. They at Kent State and back at Baylor, they ran the ball more than they passed it. And their yards were the same because they're going to try to get over the top. They're going to try to take their shots there. That's a big piece of this. Aztec Fast is not just because they snap the ball quickly, but they have put an emphasis on speed on both sides of the ball. And as far as the offense, which is what you're asking about, that's what they're going to try to do. They're going to try to, their tight end is really the big key to all of it. If they have two of them, they can even play them with two, as long as they can kind of split them out and see how that would work. But that tight end offers them the opportunity, if he's versatile enough to, be an H-back. And now he's kind of doing a lead blocking thing. They're going to stack him outside, and he's going to hit the seam. And if he has that ability, if they don't cover him with the linebacker or something like that. But obviously that sets up the screen game. It sets up the run game. There's so much variety that comes with it. If the tight end can be versatile. And I think at the end of the day, that's really the position to pay attention to as much as anything else if you're trying to get that in-depth look at it. But I think that's what they're trying to do. I think the flip side of it is I think there's been an evolution, and Coach Lewis at least has been talking about, making the offense that they've been running at Kent State, then at Colorado, making it uniquely San Diego State's. And I think one of the things that you're going to see that might be a little bit different is the variety of tempos that they play with. If they have the ability to come up to the line really quick and pause and milk the clock if they want to, they can play at different speeds, and that can be sometimes just as effective as anything else. And so how all of that stuff blends together with an underclassman signal caller is your guess is as good as mine. We're going to obviously break that down, but in its basics, that's what it is. It spreads everybody out, forces the defense to play really vanilla, which means what you're getting on defense, so you can scheme your offense, and it actually looks like the college football game because they're playing the way you expect them to, and the scheme works and the fit and all that stuff. For the quarterback, it's very much in the modern system of just, I got 1, 2 reads, and if the ball's in there, I'm going to tuck it on this play. Maybe I'll get to a third read, occasionally 4, and even less 5, and we go. RPOs is part of it. Bubble screens is part of it. Running the football, physicality, being able to move the chains that way is really, honestly, I think where it starts. And so people expecting, this to be thrown all over the place, which is the exciting part. I think they want to get big chunks on the ground as well.
Well, let's get to the position where it all starts on offense, and that's the quarterback. 2023 starter Jalen Maiden has graduated. They brought in A.J. Duffy from Florida State in the winter. That quarterback room is young heading into 2024. How do the quarterbacks look in the spring?
It's interesting because I think the biggest piece in all these questions, and I apologize, this is just where we're at. Coach Lewis talks about that they're at 65% of where they want to be. And that's kind of intentional with how they build up and ramp up towards fall camp. At the beginning of spring, we asked him, "Hey, when do you want to name a quarterback, starting quarterback?" And he said, "Oh, by the end of spring." It came and went, and they kind of backed off of that, and they said, "Well, you know what? If we're going to name a starter, we want to make sure that they're playing at the full speed of what we want, so we can actually make a proper evaluation." And so AJ Duffy, as you mentioned, has been kind of the assumed starter. He's taken all the first reps. He looked really good in the spring game, looked the most in control. But the question still remains that, if he had the goal, Sean Lewis had the goal of announcing a starter in spring, what did AJ Duffy not do that made them wait and pause? So I think there's a lot of there are 3 other scholarship quarterbacks, all of them young, who have a chance. Danny O'Neill, who was, one of the media darlings because he was committed to Lewis and Deion Sanders at Colorado, followed him to San Diego State, came in as an early enrollee, and he was up one, they have him as OR listed on the depth chart. And the idea, I would imagine, is you have a true freshman who should have been in high school still, right, going to his prom, that sort of stuff, and he's able to be close enough to AJ Duffy, this is his 3rd year in college. Like, wouldn't you expect now going into the start of spring, which is on Thursday, that O'Neill's going to be further along than he was when he was just a freshman. And now he's got his legs under him, and he's got the offense and all that kind of stuff. Then they got a guy, Kyle Crum, who is he's got a little bit of time as a freshman. He kind of been pushing around. Jalen Maiden is pushing and trying to get those starting things. He's very much in the mix. He feels like they had a good summer and they're ready to kind of, have that competition. He went to a local Southern California school, Norco. And they play in the same division as, I think it's Centennial High School, which is a perennial top 15, top 25 school in the country. And they had this long history of just winning every game in that division because they're just head and shoulders above them. And Kyle Crum led Norco to a victory. And it was such a big deal. They have this celebration where they jump into a pool, and the principal of the school jumped into the pool with them to celebrate it. Then another one, another guy, Javance Johnson, who I'm not getting his name right. There's a hyphen in there that he's added that I have a hard time pronouncing. But he went to Chaminade High School. He's the biggest of them, has the biggest arm of them, has advanced kind of passing stuff. If you're going and you're saying, well, who's the guy if you were looking at him and saying, who's the guy, it's him. And it's, I think he's still trying to have, his mind catch up to where his arm, but I think there's a lot of possibilities. But AJ Duffy has been the guy. And so it'd be really hard to imagine something different. But if they're really truly only at 65%, then it's got to be wide open, because whoever can run it at that speed consistently is going to be able to separate them here at the beginning.
Well, moving over to the running game, the running back room looks really deep going into the year. They returned their top 4 rushers from a year ago, and Jalen Armstead, Keenan Kristen, Cam Davis, and Lucky Sutton. And then, they added Marquez Cooper after the spring, who's familiar with Coach Lewis. He played for Coach Lewis there at Kent State. But for the guys that were there in the spring, how did those guys look?
It's interesting. They're again, just like we just talked about with Javance, they all look the part. With the exception of Cam Davis. Cam Davis is the only one who's a little bit undersized, but he is super quick, super fast, like was involved in their kick return game, like that kind of guy. They look great. The reality, though, is all four of those guys to date have underperformed. Lucky Sutton, who you mentioned, was a 4-star recruit coming in, a local kid who went nuts in the state playoffs, leading one of the local schools, Cathedral Catholic, to the state title. And it was like one of those rare where he was a 3-star and he was so good in the state finals that they had to give him a 4-star, that kind of thing. He is an unbelievable athlete. He's caught passes in like 7-on-7, and 7-on-7 you can't run away from anybody because you just have to touch him. Well, he still did, and he looks like a tight end. Dude is huge, but he runs tall. Does a lot of and makes way too much contact with the way that he runs because he is so big. And then he also just has lacked the vision and maybe a little bit of that wiggle to kind of make people miss. He did have some really long runs. Utah State, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. People have been excited about him. Cam Davis, again, we mentioned him. Again, it flashes. He's smaller, does have that escapability, but hasn't fully been able to put it all together. Jalen Armstead is a guy who they've talked about every year. But I mean, I'm at San Jose State, and I think he had close to 140 yards. And I'm asking, Coach Hoke, I'm saying, hey man, why now? Like, why did it all come together? Was it the weather? Because it was kind of rainy, whatever. And he was just talking about how, I had to talk with him about making sure he gets his pads in front of him. And I'm thinking, man, this guy's played so much football, and you're still having to talk about getting your pads in front of him. He's huge, can run, has the ability to make guys miss, has all of the things that you could want in this offense. And then there's Keenan Christian, who, USC guy, track guy, elite speed. Every person who's playing the Aztecs in EA Sports is using him because he's their fastest guy at a 98. And he's all of those things. He's all of those things. There was a bowl game a couple of years ago where he caught swing passes and it was like gone. And so he's that big play guy. And I think Sean Lewis, who loves speed, I think he's going to want to be the coach to finally unlock him. I think everybody has wanted to be that guy, got reps early at USC, had some production, but he just hasn't quite put it together. I think they were trying to make him an inside runner and be a tougher runner last year. And I think he did that, but he still has the issue where he just doesn't make guys miss. Like, you can be as fast as you possibly can, but if you're one-on-one within the hole, all that space is gone and you're not going to be able to go. And so they all look the part. They can all catch the ball. Every one of them has good hands, which is another good component to Sean Lewis's offense that, they're going to be looking to try to exploit, maybe some 2-back stuff, be able to bring 2 of them on there and use those skills and things like that. But the reality is it's an underperforming group. The Aztecs have had 2 subpar years from their perspective after going 12-2. And they rebuilt their offense to give the rock to their running backs, which is their deepest room, their best room. And you mentioned having all of that, the stats back. Well, they're not great. I mean, the bottom line is they're just not, and they had plenty of opportunity. And so I think they went out and got Marquez Cooper, who is the NCAA's active leading rusher. And he's had 3 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons. He started as an 18-year-old for Sean Lewis, came into camp early. He was only 17 years old when he started college. So he's actually pretty young, even though he's played all of these years. Had, the 240 plus, 280 plus carries the last 2 years he was at Kent State. He's listed as an OR with Keenan Christian at the top of the depth chart. If those other guys who are remaining are going to be able to take a significant amount of carries away from Marquez Cooper, they're better. And talking to Marquez in June, he said this is the best group that he's ever been around, most talented, to your point of how you asked the question at the beginning. But it's time, especially for those guys at the top who are older, and it's kind of put up or shut up time. And they're, their NFL futures, hinge on what they can do this year and if they can separate themselves. And same thing with Marquez Cooper. I mean, he has all the production in the world, but he does not have the measurables. and how he takes that and where he goes at this level is going to be a big deal.
Well, the Aztecs wide receiver room will look a little bit different here in 2024. Mekhi Shaw, Balin Brooks, Felipe Wesley II, among others, return, but there are some new faces that come in from the portal. You got Lewis Brown comes in from Colorado State. Nate Bennett comes in from Portland State. You got Jerry McClure from UCLA. And then Jashawn Polk reuniting with Coach Lewis, too. How did this room look in the spring?
Inconsistent. It would be the way that I would say that it looked. Jashawn Polk and Mekhi Shaw were maybe the exceptions to that. They were the guys who I think separated themselves the most, and I think that means that there's going to be opportunities for the other guys. They haven't been able. One really important aspect of Sean Lewis's offense is finding somebody who can take the top off the ball. They not only want defenses to cover them sideline to sideline. They want them to cover them for 60 yards. So, and then be able to find all the stuff that's in between all that. But that only works if you have a legit deep threat. And so Lewis Brown, he's going to get a shot to be that guy. Jashawn Polk a little bit, but he played more of that role in the slot. I think that they're looking to find that guy. You mentioned that the transfer from Portland. You mentioned his name. Well, I lost it.
Nate Bennett.
Nate Bennett. Thank you, Nate. Nice kid. Big, very. But he's coming up from an FCS school. Does he have the ability to play? What role does he look at? Does he slot in at? Jerry McClure is young. I mean, I think the interesting part about McClure is he's still a freshman. So he competed at there. Dude's a specimen. That guy is a track star. He's big. He's everything. He would fit as that guy, but does he have the maturity to be able to do it? We mentioned Lewis Brown. He does have some production. Obviously, probably the most famous game, that he played when at Colorado State when they played Colorado, and he's doing the celebration with the wrist, and doing all that stuff. So it's going to be different, but I think it's going to be Mekhi Shaw. I think it's going to be Jashawn Polk, and then they have a stable of young guys that. I think what this offense is designed to do is to give one-on-one stuff. So they got a freshman 6'4", Will Cianfreni. He is a Texas transplant, but he came out here and played with Julian Sayin, who I think is at Ohio State now, right? He went to Alabama, then to Ohio State. So he wanted to come out here and play with him as a wide receiver. And this guy, like I said, he's 6'4", and he has more publicity doing like huge basketball dunks than he does like the stuff as being a wide receiver. The guy can get up, and he's going to have one-on-one opportunities against smaller guys and things like that. So he's somebody that might, be somebody who has that, because, the younger, the further you are away from the ball, the easier it is to be able to make a play. Heath McRee is another guy. He's from Texas, just a flat-out speedster. Every play, he just, got over the top. Ben Scolari is a guy from Nevada who kind of is an in-between of all of those guys, big frame. So I think there's going to be a lot of competition there. And they're going to figure it out with the chemistry and stuff like that. But the part that they didn't quite get to in spring camp is that deep threat. Deep threat wasn't there. And so the quarterback that's able to throw that ball, the receiver that's able to go and dominate in the air on those one-on-one matchups, they're going to be the guys who are going to play. Balin Brooks, as you mentioned, he's a big guy, not like top end speed, but good enough speed, good hands, really smooth, polished route runner. Felipe Wesley's a talented guy. And he flashed in moments last time, but not like that, not as you expected, but he kind of had some injuries and ways back in spring camp. So a lot of possibilities, and honestly, the comment could be made throughout the roster. There's a lot of solid guys. Like, I don't think there's a bunch of huge holes. I think they did a really good job of plugging in dudes who can play at this level all throughout the roster. It's clear they got a bunch of Robins. I don't know who their Batman is. And that's really what fall camp is going to be. Is who's the guy? Who are the players that everybody else can kind of slot in around and the other people are scared of? And who is that in the wide receiver room? I don't know, but I will say that Jayshawn Polk, if this was last year and we were having this conversation, and instead of going to West Virginia, he went to San Diego State, you would say, oh, this is one of the biggest G5 guys producing and all those kinds of things. So I think he's really exciting. He's healthy. He did the whole spring practice. They did some precautionary stuff just because of the injury, but he was a full participant. So I think he's somebody who's really exciting. And Mekhi Shaw, as we mentioned, he has athleticism that you don't really expect. He was a former walk-on who kind of, is a great story, local kid. But you watch him run around, you're like, dude, that guy's fast. Oh, that guy's wiry, strong. Okay. He doesn't look it. Sincerely, you would walk around and you're like, you're a football player. He's like a biology major. You're like, okay, that fits better. But yet he just produces. So lots of pieces. I don't know who if they have somebody who's just like a stud that is going to force everybody to play honest and all of those things.
Do they have anybody lining up on the outside or in that X position in the spring pretty consistently?
Yeah, that would be Bennett, Brown, Mekhi Shaw, McClure, Balin Brooks. Those guys were all there. One guy that's really fun that we didn't talk about is there's a guy who came in as a safety, and they ran out of receivers last year, so he slid over as a true freshman, and he's stuck though, and he's been playing that slot position behind Jayshawn Polk, and I should have my roster in front of me. I don't, but he's a really exciting guy, very fast, very big, very physical, who could factor in this as well.
Well, when we were talking about the offense, you kind of described how the tight ends are utilized in this offense, but let's kind of like talk about the tight ends from a personnel perspective. That room's going to look very different here in 2024. Mark Redmond was second on the team in receiving yards, touchdown reception, and routes run last year. He's off to Louisville. Jay Rudolph is off to Sacramento State, and Cameron Harpole is off to Arizona State. Right. That leaves Logan Tanner as the top returner. But, they brought in some guys from the portal. They brought in Jude Wolf coming over from USC, who was there for the spring. And then post-spring, they bring in Michael Harrison from Colorado. What can we expect from this group here in 2024?
I think – so the guy I was talking about was Jordan Napier. That's the wide receiver. 6'2", 200 pounds, can run like the wind. And they had him lining up in the slot, which, could be pretty good from that position. But from the tight end position, it's really interesting. San Diego State has kind of developed, a little bit of a tight end U reputation. Dan Bellinger most recently going into the NFL, but they have other guys. David Wells is still doing his thing. Collie Waring was a high pick. Late Gavin Escobar, he was a high pick. They've had tight ends, kind of going through a little bit of a factory, and so they had a lot of high end guys. You mentioned Mark Redmond. He was a transfer. Had Alabama offers coming out of high school, went to Washington, didn't really do too much there, came over and he was good. He was good, but he just didn't offer the physicality that they needed for that offense. And I don't know if the offense that they had really suited him because of that. They really needed a guy like Dan Bellinger who could really, be there. And so it's interesting, man. This is the most fun position as a football nerd. This is the most fun position to be able to pay attention to if you follow San Diego State. And even if you don't, but you like football, this is it. The caliber of athlete that Sean Lewis has access to at San Diego State compared to what he had at Kent State is almost like the difference between a high FCS and a low FCS. There are FCS schools that are better positioned, in my opinion, to be able to be successful than the FBS Kent State that with just the facility and the athletes that they got. So some of the guys who played tight end were fullbacks. Like they had literally next to no ability whatsoever to be able to catch the football. They just were not a threat at all. And then they had other guys who were like thinner, but they didn't really block. And he just utilized whatever skills that were there. And so a perfect example of that is Mikey Harrison, who was a walk-on at Colorado, gets his degree there. Sean Lewis, he has 30 catches last year, which is very substantial for anyone, but for a tight end position especially. And they give him a scholarship. He's here now. but he's like 6'3". I think he was listed at 205 over there. He's listed at 220 now. I'd be curious to see if that's like one of those, make you look better kind of things. But he was essentially a slow wide receiver who played the tight end position and offered all that multiplicity in terms of how they like did all of the different formations and stuff like that we talked about at the beginning. So he's somebody who's really exciting. And it'll be interesting to see how that works, and if they have kind of that tweener guy who doesn't completely fit. Jude Wolf looks like an NFL guy. Dan Bellinger was here, as we talked about, and Dan Bellinger is just a specimen. He's a guy who you walk into the room and you go, oh, okay, that guy's going to play professional football, right? The only thing about Dan Bellinger is he's a nicer guy than he's a good football player. You know what I mean? It's just, that's like the kind of it. But Jude Wolf, he is just a stud. His issue is just he's been injured. I mean, he's been injured a lot, often, and it's going to be a question of can he stay healthy this year? And then they got a guy, Logan Tanner, who is again another guy. He's young. He's about 6'3". So if he was 6'5", if he was 6'5", he would be in the SEC. And he's from Texas, had interest from some of these other schools and things like that. But he came to San Diego State. He was a pass first guy, has put on a little weight, probably not enough weight. But he could also be somebody who, for the first time, gives Sean Lewis a tight end who can be really good in the passing game, who can play the tight end, who can play on the line as the H-back. You can split him out and do all the things to kind of give Sean Lewis like his full creativity. And so what's interesting about it is, as great as it was at Kent State, they were limited by the kind of tight end that they had. They made it work. It was great, but there's an element that could be even better. And they didn't have it at Colorado either, where this guy who can maul people on the line, open up holes for running backs, but also force you to try to cover him with a safety or some sort of matchup problem. And if Wolf, Tanner, or if Mikey Harrison in his second year in this system figures out how to block maybe a little bit better, it could actually add a component that has never really existed in Sean Lewis's offense.
Do you think we'll see a rotation of those three guys, or do you think Jude Wolf's probably kind of getting the majority of the carries, the other two are kind of chipping in here and there? Or
I think a lot of that, I don't know. I mean, that's the simple answer. There were times when we were at practice that they had two tight ends in the game. They were practicing two tight end sets, so it wouldn't shock me to see multiple tight ends at the same time. I think a lot of that has to do with health permitting, right?
Sure.
And then I think that, what they're going to try to do is, if their best skill position players, we talked about, there's a lot of Robins at the wide receiver position, but is there a Batman? Well, if you got two Batmans at the tight end position, they're both going to play. And then after that, how they do all their rotations and things like that is one of the things to see, because one of the big keys is they do not want to substitute on offense. Every time that they substitute, that's a win for the defense, because the defense gets to match personnel. They get to bring in fresh bodies. So, if they are going to sub in, it's going to be like possession by possession. But I think right now, they've been really happy with Jude Wolf. He was their representative at Mountain West Media Days in Las Vegas. And he looks the part. And so I think if he's healthy, that's probably the guy. With, sprinkling in the other guys as well.
All right, let's talk about this O-line. They bring back 3 of their 5 guys from that line in 2023. You bring back the center. You bring back Miru, played right guard and right tackle. And then you got Abdullah. He played both guard positions as well. And then there were 8 guys who transferred out of this room, but Lewis brings back 4 guys in via the portal. You got Nate Williams that comes in from Atkins. Bryant comes in from North Dakota, I believe. And then after the spring, you bring in Bajorn from Arizona. What are your expectations for this O-line in 2024?
Again, another just really interesting thing, because we're going to talk about expectations, I'm sure, for what the season is, whenever that comes up. But one of the interesting parts is, as much like change as San Diego State has had, and you guys know this probably better than I do, all the teams on their schedule are experiencing tons of change. I mean, that's just normal in football now. And so I think 5 years ago, if San Diego State had this much change, you go, oh man, are they going to be able to gel? Are they going to be able to do the things? But I think every year the teams that figure out how to gel, because the days of having an offensive line who have been together for 4 years and now they're ready to hit their stride, I don't think is going to happen. I mean, San Diego State, it's interesting that their offensive lines have not been like the strengths of their teams in terms of just like what you would think they would in their history. I mean, in 2021, they were dominant along their offensive line, but in 2022 and 2023, it was less so. But even with that, they lost Josh Simmons, who I think is a dark horse for being a first round pick in the NFL draft in the upcoming year, transferred to Ohio State. They got Brandon Crenshaw Dixon, who Florida reached out to, and it picked him up. They got Cade Bennett, who's over at TCU, that went, and these are high level places. Even a backup, Tommy Marabella, got a really good offer, and is I think he may have went somewhere else for the degree that he's going after, but got some like looks from the Power 5 conferences. And so San Diego State, for everything that the line has been kind of like the ire of everybody the last couple of years, but yet these guys go and they're getting big NIL deals. They're moving to these Power 5 conferences. And so what do you expect coming back? I mean, the thing I think that you would expect is Miles Morale and Ross Ulugalu-Masuli. Those two guys were injured during spring camp. And because they were injured, minor surgeries that they were working their way back, they didn't really practice. But they're slated to be the starters. And if those two guys can play really, really well, their interior line could be really good, because in Ulugalu-Masuli's absence, Braden Bryant, the transfer from North Dakota, has played a fantastic center. And he really looks like he's solidified that position, and he's allowed Ulugalu-Masuli to slide back to guard, which is where he played before last year. And he was kind of rushed in there because their centers just couldn't snap the ball. Like, it was this weird thing at the early part of practice. And so he kind of was forced to play that role, did well there, but he's more of a guard. And then, so now you're saying, okay, well, if you have the interior of your line and you got three seniors, right? Guys who've played a good amount of football, and they're in the middle of your line. Morale went to Washington. I think he was like the number 2 overall center coming out of high school. He went to Mater Dei Santa Ana, the big, national school. So, I mean, these are guys with big pedigree. And if you have those guys in the middle of your line with the numbers game that they play, just those 3 guys by themselves can be huge, creating pockets, things of that nature. On the outside, it's so interesting. You mentioned Dean Abdullah. He started 7 games, I believe, a year ago, but he was just fine in all of them. And his place on the line is a little bit unsure. He doesn't quite have the size to play inside, but he also doesn't quite have the athleticism to play on the edge. So he is, I think, looking for a backup role. Nate Williams has played a ton of football, most recently for Akron. And he came in, he was the right tackle. He's been the right tackle. Probably with his age and experience could slide over, but doesn't have the athleticism to play left tackle. So Christian Jones, who is a 6'9" giant human being guy, he started the first, I want to say, 6 games last year, and then was replaced by Drew Azzopardi, who has since transferred to Washington. Right, a lot of moving pieces. But Christian Jones is back. But then, as you said, Arizona, they one of their guys who was in the mix to be their starter. Not, maybe not. Some people say he wasn't winning it, but he was getting first team reps and all that kind of stuff. So, good summer, and you're the starter at Arizona. Started their bowl game. Joe Borjon, he is an insanely big guy. He's 6'8". He everywhere he goes, there he casts a shadow. I mean, he's one of those kind of guys. Really athletic, can bend, can do everything, and he's been the guy that they think is going to be there at left tackle. But the question is, he went to junior college, and the question is, why hasn't he produced when he has so many great measurables? And so they're going to try to figure that out here in fall camp. But they got a whole bunch of age and guys who've played a lot of snaps. So if anybody could figure out how to gel and figure this out, you would assume it could be I think they're going to have, I'd have to look at it again, but I think it's 5 seniors. Like maybe Borjon's a junior. So 5 seniors and a redshirt junior. So if you expect somebody to be able to do it, it's them. And I would say it's the new way of college football for G5 schools and maybe even P5 schools too, where again, you're not going to get time. You produce or you're done. And so I think that it's kind of the first time in a lot of positions that you're seeing it for San Diego State on the field, because it hasn't really hit them before. They had guys that they were kind of grooming and bringing up, and they had some loyalty to the staff and things of that nature. But I don't think it's that weird across the country anymore to have replacements on this and trying to figure it out and trying to piece those things together in 1 year. And effectively the coaches who are better not at necessarily developing somebody over 3 to 5 years, but who can take somebody at the beginning of fall camp to be at this level, at the end of fall camp to be at that level. These are the coaches who are going to start making millions of dollars, much more than the guys who are going to take a 3-star and turn them into an NFL in 5 years. And so that shift is playing out in front of our eyes at San Diego State.
All right, Paul, if you have to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024, who are you going to pick?
A breakout. So I can't say Marquez Cooper, right? Because he has 3,000-yard seasons. That wouldn't be a breakout. Like, we know him. He's a Maxwell on the Maxwell list. Like, it's not fair. All right.
Yeah.
I know it'd be cheating. That's like completely the safe pick. I'm going to go AJ Duffy. And I know, again, that's another safe pick because he's the quarterback in Sean Lewis's system. He's going to have so many. I think he'll be the starter. I think he's going to get the reps in terms of, they snap the ball a whole bunch. And I think that while he's not going to be as good as he's going to be next year in this offense, I think that Sean Lewis and the designs that they have is very QB friendly. And so I would expect him by numbers wise to be an all conference QB because he's going to get, more opportunities. So I'll go with him. If it's also cheating to take the quarterback, another guy that I would throw out there, who I think is going to have a pretty big year, is Mekhi Shaw. He's a senior, played lots of football, does it the right way, an unbelievable worker, has had steady production, but just hasn't quite had the opportunities. And I think that those opportunities are going to present themselves both as a wide receiver and as a punt returner. So I'll give you him as well. That is a little bit less cliche and easy.
All great choices for sure.
Well, let's move over to that defensive side of the ball. And as you might expect, there's a new coach leading the way with the Aztecs defense, and that's Eric Schmidt. He comes to San Diego State from Washington, where he most recently served as the edges coach there and special teams coordinator. What style of defense can we expect to see from Coach Schmidt?
Guess as good as mine. No, I'm just kidding. So I'm still trying to piece this together. I do get to cover practice here on Saturday and see if I can, figure this question out into it. But you all remember Gary Patterson, former, everybody knows Gary Patterson, 4.25, one of the best defenses that they had at TCU. When he stepped down, a coach named Jerry Kill took over for him on an interim basis, right? You're all tracking with me now?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Eric Schmidt's first job as a coach was, I believe, at Southern Illinois under Jerry Kill.
Okay.
Kill and Patterson both learned the 4.25 at a place that they were at together. And so I believe that if you're trying to find a comparison of what the 4.25 would look like, it is those Gary Patterson TCU defenses. So if that helps, and if you remember, they used to take a bunch of running backs and turn them into defensive ends, and those guys used to just crash the quarterback from the edge really, really. If you remember this, that is what they're trying to do, but I think it's a little bit more formal. So they have the edge position. They had an edge position. They now say it's just defensive line, but they got an edge coach, Rob Orrick, who was the defensive coordinator at Idaho. And Idaho just had a really good year in the FCS. And for him to go and become a position coach at San Diego State, leaving a defensive coordinator position to try to get his career going. But it's those edge pass rushers that they're just wanting to hang their hat on, which is, of course, as you mentioned, what he did at Washington. Speed is gigantic in this defense. So I think Sean Lewis used to run a 3.35 when he was at Kent State. They moved to the 4.25. And I think part of it is it offers them a symmetry in the way in which they build their off-season work. Jeff Sobel, who is their strength and conditioning coach, has been with Lewis for a long time. Interesting cat, man. I mean, we've had recruits talk about how they go in for an official visit and the strength and conditioning coaches say, we're not going to ask you to do anything we can't do. And they they just work out for them, like all kinds of lifts and stuff. And the guys are like, what is going on? Like, we're just on a visit. And the strength staff is like lifting weights and they're, kind of freaking out as a good selling point. And so they really run a good program there as far as strength and conditioning. But I think it's about, it's beginning of the year is about building strength. Summer is about building speed. And I think the 4-2-5 more than the 3-3-5, and especially, in the back end and the way they use their defensive backs is really built on speed a lot more. And so I think there's a lot more symmetry. But, their idea is they want their edge rushers to get after the quarterback and have the opportunity to rush the quarterback more than any other position around the country. So when they go into a kid's room who has offers to be an outside linebacker at XYZ Power 4 school, they could say, that's cool and all, but you realize that you're going to drop back 45% of the time. But over here at San Diego State, you're going to drop back 15%, just enough to keep them honest in case they want to drop things off to the running backs. We're going to let you turn it loose. You can rush, the edge rusher. They don't play sound assignment wise. It's turn them loose. They're not there necessarily to set the edge, to keep that outside containment, to do also. They can go inside, they can go outside. They stunt a ton, and just trying to free up those four guys. And then of course they have, exotic blitz packages behind that. So I would say that's if anybody's familiar with college football, it's that TCU style defense. That's my best guess sitting here, a little bit before August turns the calendar, man. I mean, that's my best guess in the study that I've done. And it seems like the coaching history leans to that idea. We have interviewed Coach Schmidt. We have a podcast, SDSU podcast. You can find that online or whatever if you want to have the deep dive with him. But I would say they're the attacking style, very similar to what they were doing before, where they're going to try to bring 11 hats to the football, hit with bad intentions, all of those kind of cliches that San Diego State's been known for. And I think, that's kind of Coach Schmidt's defense in a nutshell, and we'll see how it works.
Well, let's move to the personnel that are going to run Coach Schmidt's offense, and we'll start up front with the defensive line. They lose Garrett Fountain and Daniel Acapulco, but they do return Tupu Alualu. He's probably, I guess, the highlight of the returners, and then they bring in a bunch of transfers, some pre-spring and some post-spring.
Yeah.
What can we expect from this group? And has anyone kind of stood out, or is the coaches really excited about anybody maybe that came in post-spring?
Sure. Marlon Lewis, who came in before spring, he is a edge rusher, defensive end kind of guy. Came from Richmond, has multiple successful seasons at the FCS level. He is as the way that they split their edge rushers, they have it's field and boundary. So they have their best pure pass rusher at the boundary, and then they have their kind of a little bit bigger, more hold the edge, hold up against a tight end on the field. And so that's Marlon Lewis, and he looks the part. The dude is a specimen. He looks fast. He looks like, he was doing everything that they wanted him to do. He really impressed. Dominic Oliver is a returner, and Dominic Oliver's burst off the line is special. Even among all these really, really good athletes, he was so good, in fact, that they made him kind of a pass rushing specialist in the 3-3-5, which is really hard to do because, you have the three linemen, and he wasn't a linebacker. And so he's slated right now as the starter at the pure rush end. And I think that really suits him very, very well. You meant the other edges that are interesting. They have Ryan Henderson, who is a guy who's been in their program a few years, big athlete. It'll be interesting to see, there were thought that maybe he could gain a little weight and slide inside. Brady Nasser, who played as a true freshman, he's also there. On the weak side, you're going to have a guy like Ezekiel Larry, who, again, another FCS guy. He was at Yale and decided to transfer closer to home and also to an FBS program. They also got a guy named Jared Batty, who was like an all-world athlete kind of a guy, went to Illinois, played linebacker, was a little bit of maybe, and they're trying to move him and make him into a rush defensive end. And then you move inside, and inside's the one interesting part. And, I asked Coach Schmidt about that because if you ask anybody why teams play the 3-3-5, the answer is because we can't get the 330-pound space-eating defensive tackles to come to our school. And, a lot of these coaches, they have their coaching roots with Dino Babers back at Syracuse. And that's what Dino Babers said at Syracuse with a 3-3-5, that he couldn't get the kind of linemen to show up to an ACC school. And so I said, well, why, if they can't get them to Syracuse, why are they going to come to San Diego State? And he said effectively, great question. That's our challenge, but we have a lot of things to offer. And TCU, they, in that history of it with Patterson, he used to say that they could only get one nose tackle every year. That was all they were able to get. And it looks like, and there's two ways you get them. You either somehow luck out and you get a guy who came in as a linebacker and he puts on 60 pounds. Problem is that cat's transferring if he can move down to the line in today's world, right? So what they have, the other way to do it is through strength. And Tupu Alualu is probably that guy to be able to be that space-eating guy who can handle double teams. And then Darian Dalton, he's that 3-technique defensive tackle, more of that rush guy who's going to be doing a lot of the stunts and a lot of that athletic stuff. He's coming into his own. Old linemen take a little bit longer to get there, but he's had some really explosive stuff in workouts. They have Wyatt Drager, who is, I would argue, is more suited for this defense as kind of that nose tackle kind of a guy if they want to be able to bring people there. And then, it's there's guys behind them that they brought in. They brought in a guy from Colorado State who played defensive tackle. Then he moved to offensive line last year. He's transferred back in. They're going to be looking at him there. Sam Benjamin, a guy from Arizona State that they're bringing in, but we haven't seen him. They did have, a guy from Marshall that they brought in, but after spring, it was clear that he wasn't going to be the guy. And so he's transferred out. And there's a lot of opportunities, and it is a question mark, just plain and simple.
So moving over to the linebackers, it's kind of highlighted by the return of Cody Moon. He was second on the team in tackles a year ago.
Right. This
room lost 127 tackles between three guys who went to the transfer portal, one of them being their leading tackler from 2023, Cyrus Fialisau, who believe he went to Washington. Is that right?
Arizona State.
Okay. And then Cooper McDonald off to TCU, who we've talked about a lot, and then Vi Cahoe off to Montana.
Right.
But they brought in quite a few transfers, and then they brought another transfer post spring, and Kyle Moretti from Central Michigan. What do you kind of expect from this linebacker group here in 2024?
It's interesting. I think, slated as the starters is Owen Chambliss, who is a freshman who transferred over from Utah. And like all of these guys who are transferring in from the power conferences, he's a specimen. I mean, he looks bigger and more athletic than a lot of the guys that are around him. He runs really, really well. Tana Latui is another guy. He was at Army, a local guy, came back, big dude. Really that middle linebacker that the 4-2-5 needs. But I would be really surprised if we're not talking about Cody Moon and Kyle Moretti. Brady Anderson, he's another guy, DJ Herman, older guys who have been around, played special teams a lot, primarily just because they're switching defenses. And to go from the 3-3-5 to the 4-2-5, and also depend on underclassmen up the middle. I think it's a big task for those guys. Flip side of it is if Chambliss and Latui are able to hold the older guys out, they're really good. But Moon and Moretti have both been all conference selections. I think, Moretti was a third team MAC guy. I think at one point Moon was a second team Mountain West guy. They have Their number of tackles for their career are like almost the same. I think Moretti has like one more than Moon, but they're both over 200. So there's a lot of production from those spots. But, they expected Cody Moon to be better last year. He had a couple games where he flashed and then he just wouldn't play very much and things like that. He had a hard time keeping on weight. And so I think they're trying to get everything out of him. He looks bigger. And I'm expecting a big year from him. Obviously, Kyle Moretti, we haven't seen, but DJ Herman is maybe physically the guy who would fit the profile for what they want from their middle linebacker the most. He's a big guy, played a lot of special teams, a very exciting guy. And the way he plays, Brady Anderson has been this blitzing linebacker who's been around the program, was honestly their best blitzer last year, got on the field some. How he enters into that mix will be really interesting, but I think that it's wide open. I think it's wide open. And I think, the former staff, I'm confident in saying, use the depth chart to send messages to their players. It feels like to me that that's what this staff is doing too. And they're trying to tell these older guys, like, look, you're going to be left behind if you guys don't step up your game.
It sounds like they have a lot of depth, which is a good problem to have.
Right. But again, it's the same issue. Moretti and Moon, they look like they could be Batman. They have some history, but you just don't know. They haven't been, Moon didn't do what he needed to do last year. And Moretti was a third team MAC guy. That's good, but that's in that Robin category. Again, and who's Batman? Who's the guy who's just the guy who makes that play when you need it, who defenses scheme for, and they're solid depth, but sometimes if you got 6 of them, it's really because you don't have any.
Well, let's talk about the defensive backfield that probably suffered the most when it comes to, lost production from 2023. And it's going to be an important part of this 4-2-5 defense. The room lost his top 3 tacklers from a year ago. You got Kadarius Barfield, he's graduated. Marcus Ratcliffe, he transferred to Texas A&M, and then you got Des Malone, who transferred to Oklahoma. But not all is lost. The room has several guys who saw lots of playing time in 2023, and they brought in 4 guys from the portal. How did this group look in the spring, and what's your expectation from the secondary in 2024?
Well, it's even more dire because they also lost Noah Tumblin, who was their other starting cornerback. And he's in an NFL camp, had an opportunity to come back for another year when undrafted, but decided to be in the pro ranks. So they lost a lot, as you said. It's just a really interesting part of all of this. They lost Marcus Ratcliffe, who is a stud human being, huge, looks like a linebacker, but can run. But he wasn't great. Now, he started as a true freshman, but he looked like a true freshman. He was talented enough that he ends up moving on to Texas A&M. But I think they'll be able to replace him just because, where Ratcliffe is as a junior is not where he is as a freshman. But just replacing the production of him as a freshman, I think they're going to be able to do that. A name to watch out for there at that kind of strong safety, kind of that in-the-box safety is a guy named Eric Butler. He played at that Corona Centennial that we were talking about earlier with one of the best. He just played at a really high level in high school and has played through, made some big plays, blocked a lot of punts, oddly enough, of where he's really made his mark. Long athlete, he's fast. You would like, he can cover. He played cornerback in high school, has flirted some with even going back to corner, with the multiplicity that offenses have, having as many guys who can cover as possible is a pretty good thing to have. Deshaun McEwen, he's another guy to be able to look for. This is a guy with a 40-inch vertical, went to TCU, transferred over to San Diego State, just an athlete of an athlete. They have a new position called the stud safety, and the stud safety is basically the guy who they need to play and be their best player. He's and he can be all sorts of things. They have 4 guys that are listed there. One of them is listed one of the guys who's listed there is a big, strong safety kind of guy. One guy who's listed there is a full-on nickel corner. Another guy who's listed there is kind of that hybrid safety that they did a whole bunch of, and then McEwen, who's also that hybrid safety. So they could go a lot of directions with it, and maybe they're going to match up to the personnel. But Deshaun McEwen's is somebody to really pay attention to. Josh Hunter, he is the backup to McEwen, but he was their best tackler last year, even though he has a small frame. And and he's somebody to be paying attention to. Like you said, they brought in another couple of transfers who are going to be in the mix. JD Coffey, who they brought in last year, didn't play a whole bunch, but he's from Texas. The Longhorns came over, transferred over to San Diego State. At corner, they have a few guys that are going to be in the mix there. They had four cornerbacks the last couple of years that either went to the NFL or all these kinds of things. And Chris Johnson came in as an underclassman, true freshman, true sophomore, and actually earned his way to time. And he looked good in a limited role, and it was shocking. It was like, oh, this guy's going to redshirt, because you got so many guys in front of him. Like, there's no way he's not going to redshirt. But of course, he earned his way onto the field, and now he's looking like one of their best corners. Another guy to pay attention to, Bryce Phillips. He's a cornerback. He's a transfer that they brought over from Tennessee State. He has the bloodlines. He looks really good. Walker Bennett, who came over, I want to say, from the School of Michigan with the green one that are
Eastern Michigan.
Thank you. I had it all at the E, just got the Eastern. Eastern Michigan. He's a local guy. Came back home to kind of try to do something his final year. And then they got young guys that are there. But one guy that people aren't talking about is a guy named Jelani Whitmore. And this dude just flies. He's big, he's tall, he's long. He's never figured into the depth chart in his previous years, but perhaps his speed plays a little bit more. He's listed at the backup there. And then Jason Mitchell, he's a 4-star cornerback who went to, St. John Bosco his final year, which is, again, one of the top 5 in the country. And, he came to San Diego State. It came down to San Diego State and the University of Florida. And he kind of spurred NIL opportunities and things like that because he wanted to see the field as early as he possibly could. And he's lined up as a cornerback, tall, lengthy, very competitive kid. And so he's somebody that Aztec fans have been, they're kind of pining for because he was kind of the crown jewel of this most recent class.
All right, Paul, we asked you on the offense. Now it's time to move over to the defense. You have to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024. Who would that be?
Dominic Oliver. Yeah, Dominic Oliver. The defense just suits him. He's going to be that edge rusher. I would be very surprised if he is not, has more than a half dozen sacks on the year. I'd be very surprised.
All right. With fall camp opening up here, which position group or groups do you feel has the most opportunity for growth?
On the defense or the whole team?
The whole team.
Overall, yeah. The whole
Overall. Team. Oh, man. It's funny because I wrote an article that said my top 10 position battles. It's almost listed like every position. And I could have listed the other ones too. The interesting part about this, and I'm not a coach, so I'm not trying to sound like how the coaches would answer this, but I think it's true. Every single one. There is not a position that doesn't have a huge, and that's why San Diego State has like a 4.5 win expectation. Their over under is that 4.5 because literally at every position there's great room for growth. So I don't avoid the question. I would have to say it's going to be the edge position. We already mentioned with Dominic Oliver, Marlon Lewis. It's just a new position, and it's such an important position for this defense that if San Diego State's defense is going to be good, it's going to be because these guys figured out how to rush the quarterback consistently with 4 guys, how to play the run when they need to, how to do all the things that they're supposed to, but they really build it around those edge rushers. And so I'm going to say them just because of how important they are.
What would you say is the main strength of this team heading into 2024?
It's funny. My colleague at These Village Times, asked that exact question to Sean Lewis today, and his response is that they work hard. And it's like, oh, well, that's good that they work hard, but that's the best thing that you can say about your team. You know what I mean? Like when I asked my wife, am I good looking? She's like, well, you try really hard. You know what I mean? Like, it's not exactly like the most, like the biggest, compliment. So I would say the identity of this team, and I think that this is true. This is the first time that this staff has entered into a place and they haven't had to rebuild it. All of the habits of a winning football team are in place at San Diego State. They didn't have to teach them how to work out. Adam Hall, who was the previous strength and conditioning coach, did a phenomenal job. And so Jeff Sobel just got to pick up off of his work. And there was so much foundational stuff that he didn't have to do, and they could accelerate because they'd already been done here. The physicality that Sean Lewis has, that's been San Diego State's calling card. And so I think what their strength is I still think that there is a winning DNA in this team, that even though a lot of these guys were second on the depth chart, they were pushing a lot of the guys who transferred and went out. But I would say that is their strength. They're not going to have to be taught how to win. They're not going to be taught how to have to persevere and to push through and how to play for 40 minutes and how to do all of those things, or however long they're supposed to play. That's basketball. That they're going to play for the 48 minutes, like they're going to, they know how to do that. I think that what remains to be seen is if the coaching staff can bring them along and the players can grasp everything that they're doing at a high enough level to make them really quality. But I would say that's it. There's that winning culture, things that you need to be a winning football team. Those things are all still present at San Diego State.
Well, San Diego State gets a new head coach, gets a new defensive coordinator. You utilize the transfer portal. What are you seeing around San Diego State around NIL and just kind of how the transfer portal has impacted the Aztecs, good and bad?
Well, it's interesting because I think that it's San Diego State has always existed in kind of the lower middle class of the college football landscape. And I think that that's where they're at with all of the other things. They're not setting the world on fire with NIL. But they also have provided a lot of opportunities for their student athletes. And they have provided institutionally some of the best support that you're going to find around the country. We are talking, San Diego State as an institution, I graduated from San Diego State. If it was the academic school then that it is now, I wouldn't have gotten in, or I wouldn't have finished anyway. They're one of the top public schools in the country. When they used to, the list that they only used to make was Playboy's top party schools back in the day. And they have really, like, as an institution, kind of come into their own. They were able to win a political battle with some well-financed people to get an extension campus, which is where they built Snapdragon Stadium. So from an institution, there's a lot of institutional know-how on how to support everything that's going on in this ever-changing world. And I think San Diego State as a university has done a really good job there. But what they've lacked just excitement around the football program. You got to remember, when they went 12-2 and finished in the top 25, was in the Mountain West Championship game, those 2 years, the year prior and that year, they played in Carson, California. So it's almost like it didn't happen in San Diego. Nobody was able to enjoy it and see it and be around it. And then, they haven't been good since the opening of Snapdragon. And so that's, like, I think, eaten away from some of those opportunities. Now, the transfer portal is what the transfer portal is. If you are not among a certain, I shouldn't say that. Even the highest schools, even the top schools, are losing players to the transfer portal and NIL. It's a new phenomenon. It's not just that they go one direction and all of those kinds of things. Everybody does it. I think San Diego State wanted to keep a lot of the players who were starters last year, who ended up transferring out, that you've been mentioning throughout the thing. When that didn't happen, they pivoted to the transfer portal, and it's exactly what you would expect. It's lower group of 5 and FCS guys primarily, or Power 5 guys who haven't played. And those are the guys that they're able to attract and they're able to bring over. I think those are for obvious reasons. They're still at least giving lip service to the idea that they want to build from within. You wouldn't be able to see it by the roster turnover this year, but they're getting a big class of 2025 this year, and they're going to try to figure out a way of development and still doing those kinds of things. But I think in general, that's where it's been. I'll be interested to see when the roster gets increased to 105, if San Diego State is going to be able to give those scholarships. My inkling is they will. They've been able to do that in past increases, and they found ways, again, from that institutional control. And if it turns out that San Diego State is able to give 105 scholarships, I think that helps them to be able to retain players and to do things and limits what Power 5 schools are able to do and how they're able to poach them and things like that. Wherever that limit in, if they can match it, I think that can help. So, it definitely has not been it hasn't been a great development for them, but I don't think the sky is falling because, and this is why, if you're taking people from the group of 5 and you're moving them, number one, how many of those guys are on your schedule? Right? That's not who San Diego State is playing. They're playing teams like Oregon State. Well, Oregon State's been gutted. They're playing teams like Washington State. Washington State's been gutted. Boise State has not been gutted, but they lost their top quarterback and they lost their top wide receiver. Wyoming, new coach. UNLV came out of nowhere last year on the strength of a freshman quarterback who now I think is at USC, right? And he's gutted. So you go through and you see all the same teams are fighting the same kind of battle that San Diego State is, and that's who they got to beat on Fridays and Saturdays. And so I think that talent-wise, they're going to be close to all of those teams. And the question is, can they pull it together, get the right scheme, make the big plays, when it happens in a game and how that stuff goes. But I think so far, the NIL and the transfer portal has not been, as I said, it has not been this great strength. They don't have, like SMU or Memphis, somebody who came in there and said, hey, we're going to spend a whole bunch of money. The flip side of it is I think they're incredibly attractive to transfers. And I think their reputation, as evidenced by EA Sports being one of the tier 2 schools right along with most of the Power 4, I think they're right there, and a lot of people want to play for them and want to be around them. And then Sean Lewis I'm telling you, this guy is a dream for offensive football players, and people want to play in his system. And so I think, he is very attractive to these transfers. And what shape it keeps taking, I think, anybody's guess is as good as anyone else's. But I think San Diego State's place in that, bottom middle class is still possible for them to live in. They already weren't competing with Ohio State. They already weren't competing with Michigan in terms of getting recruits and things like that, and only occasionally could actually compete with them on the field. That probably doesn't change, but I think that there is potential to still be really exciting, really fun. And I think those upsets against those, power schools, I think are still a possibility for San Diego State, because I think their talent is still going to be one of the top G5 talents in the nation.
So we touched on this a little bit in the beginning, with Coach Lewis kind of being new there in the short time you have seen him. Is he kind of like trying to manage everything in terms of, recruiting, player retention, fundraising? You talked about the social media aspects and interaction with fans. Is he doing all that and also still being able to kind of be heavily involved with the X's and O's, or is he having other staff kind of help fill some of those other roles? Or
yeah, well, I will say this: he is the thing that everybody talks about him is the energy this man has. He works tirelessly, and to be able to do all the things that you're talking about. At the same time, he brought in a lot of guys. Zach Barton, who is the new special teams coordinator / associate head coach / tight end coach. He is somebody who's worked with him for a long time. And the way he describes it is Zach will say that he tries to take as much as he can off Sean Lewis's plate while still staying in his lane and understanding that he's the head coach, and you got to balance those things. I wrote an article that Zach Barton is the yang to Sean Lewis's yen. Lewis is upbeat. He's this. He's always optimistic. Every play is going to score. And Barton is like, let me look around the corner and see what's going on. So there is a lot of similarity, especially on the offensive side of the ball, only exclusively on the offensive side of the ball. So I think it's that. As far as the recruiting and things like that, they brought in a new recruiting coordinator, Sean Dillon, who has been at Nebraska. He was at UCF, and they of all weird things, they played middle school football together. Sean Lewis was the quarterback, and Dillon was the fullback, and so they've always kind of kept in touch, and they kind of organically through their conversations through the years have developed a kind of a system in how they would like to do recruiting, and now they're getting to do it at San Diego State. And so I think that there's a lot of delegating. There's a lot of trust that, the guys who he's hired, he's letting them do. But then the answer to your question is an absolute yes. He's doing it all. That stuff sticks out. Joe Borhan, who was it Joe Borhan? It was Joe Borhan or Nico Green, who's another offensive lineman transfer that we didn't talk about, who came in. They both had Power 5 offers. And they came in for their visit. One of those two, and I'm blanking on which one of the two, but if you would have guessed, you would have said this guy's not going to come to San Diego State. But it was Lewis personally who escorted him around everywhere and gave it everything that he had, and was available and was present and was all of those things. And that's what sealed the deal for this kid to come to San Diego State, away from these Power 5 offers that he had.
Given all of the changes in coaching staff and personnel, what does success look like in 2024 for the Aztecs?
So no matter what's going to happen, short of like a complete implosion, it's going to be viewed as a success. I think that's already done. We are habitually justifiers in what we do, and I should say, after this season, right? If he goes and has 2 bad seasons in a row, we might look back at a bad first season and say like, oh my goodness, this is going to be a foundational year no matter what. And and as well as the off season has gone and getting players in the city and everybody bought into it, I think it's going to be a success short of, like I said, winning 2 games, winning 3 games, something like that. But I think overall, when you're looking at a number, if San Diego State makes a bowl and gets back, they've been to so many consecutive bowls or been bowl eligible so many times. If they get back to being in a bowl, I think that would be a huge win. Sean Lewis won 1 game, if I'm remembering right, his first year at Kent State, first full season at Kent State. And it takes time to be able to completely redo the philosophy and to have players who are acclimated to what they're trying to do and stuff like that. But I think at the end of the day, if they make a bowl, which I think they very well should or could, I think that's really a success. And then I think after that, you just kind of roll the dice. There's 1 fewer Mountain West game this year, and where the standings look and all that kind of stuff. But I think making a bowl it would be a very, very successful season, considering all of the turnover, considering they're laying the foundation, considering they are moving from such like black and white philosophically about how they're trying to pursue winning.
Well, Paul, we've covered a lot of ground today: offense, defense, head coaching changes, NIL, etc. But is there anything else that you think we should know or that you want to share about this 2024 San Diego State Aztecs football team?
Just that there's a third phase in the game, special teams. We already mentioned Zach Barton, who is the associate coach, but also the special teams coach. They've been elite. Doug Deacon, who is now a special teams analyst, I believe, at Oklahoma. He actually was close to getting an NFL job in the same role as kind of that second tight end with second special teams guy with Minnesota, because of course Minnesota is led by a former San Diego State quarterback, right? And they've been elite at special teams, and they're the Jack Browning
who, he's going to be kicking in NFL camp, see if he sticks or whatever. He replaced Matt Ariza, who obviously is the guy who's at the front runner to being the Chiefs kicker this year. And then, and so they brought in Tyler Pastula, who was an FCS All-American and had really good averages, and they're going to need him to go a little bit more. We already talked about their return game, with we already have with Mekhi Shaw, but their kick return game could be unbelievable. Jay-Sean Polk has great numbers as a returner and in that kickoff role. Keenan Christian as well. And so I would just say that, like, their special teams, they're working at it. The way that they do practice is nutty. They start every practice, and I would have to check my notes to make sure. Definitely in spring. And it carries over to the fall, but they start every practice doing special teams, and every single coach coaches an individual part of the special teams, including the head coach, who now goes and becomes the guy who handles the gunners of all things. The head coach is showing them how to, if there's two people there, how to make sure that you have the proper leverage and you got the guy wrapped up, where your hand place it needs to be, and it's how you get off a block. And it's the head coach doing it as if that's what he does. And they run them through all kinds of so they're emphasizing special teams in a way that is going to keep them elite. And I think that attention to detail, as we're bringing this to a close, is a good way to kind of understand where they're at. They're not leaving a lot of things stones unturned. They're looking and working to try to be the best that they can. And if they don't succeed, it's not because they haven't been going after it and working for it.
With last year Brownie kind of did both punt and kick. Do they have someone like that on the roster again, or?
No, they don't. Good guy. Yeah, I don't know why to get the field goal kicker. So fun story there. They went and they had Gabriel Placencia, who was a walk-on, who was the backup. He did get to do some kickoffs, and he did get a couple of field goals because Browning was injured. And they brought in Nick Lopez, I believe, from Louisville, and they brought in another kicker from Fresno State. And they told him, well, whoever wins the job out of spring will get a scholarship. Placencia won that, but the field goal kicking wasn't exactly to where they wanted it to be. They still would like to see improvement, so they kept the competition going. The kid from Fresno State left to pursue other opportunities. Lopez is still there, and they're still competing, the guy from Louisville. But Placencia got the scholarship. One of the local groups gave him an NIL deal, so I wrote on my articles, I'm not sure anyone's had a better offseason than Gabriel Placencia. But that's who they think will be there. And it'll be interesting because to your point, Browning did both of them. Before that, Ariza did both of them. And so it's been a number of years since they've had why do they have two kickers? They don't need that. So it'll be interesting to see. Also, those guys, they actually did all three. So Ariza and Browning, they also kicked off, and they would put the ball through the end zone every time. So that's another thing to watch. Placencia was not as strong-legged on kickoffs. And so San Diego State has, been pretty good at not allowing returns because nobody got to return the ball. And so, will that continue, right? Because a lot of times G5 schools, that's kind of one thing that separates them is they don't always, especially kicking at sea level, right? Getting it into the end zone every time is not necessarily a foregone conclusion in a lot of G5 places. So how all of that stuff works out, I think it'll be really fun. Teams were kicking away from Keenan Christian for most of the year. They're not going to be able to do that with Jay-Sean Polk. So what does that look like on kickoff returns? How does that work out? Are they going to get a bunch of pooch kicks, and then what's going to be the chess match that comes in with all of that? So I don't think there's going to be a moment to look away from an Aztec game. I think every aspect of the game is there's just more and more little gems that to be able to uncover it. It's a year like no other, where no one has any idea what they're going to see. I mean, we don't. And every time we go to a practice, every time you go and look, you're looking for some sort of sight, some sort of clue about what it's going to be, but it's just going to show up on the field for all of us. And I don't think I'm excited, man. I'm excited about getting to cover the team, go on the road with them, be able to do the road games and see them in those environments and see how these kids respond to all the stuff that they're doing, learn the personality of the coaches. all that kind of stuff. So it's we got a year in front of us. It's here, man. I mean, we've been. I'm serious. I've written so much about, well, it could be like this. It could look like this. Hey, but what about this? And it could look like this. And I'm just finally like, I just want to see it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't want to guess anymore. I don't want to think. I don't want to assume. I don't want to try to read about Gary Patterson's defense and be like, well, that'll be Eric Schmidt's. It might not be. You know, that's just I'm tired of watching old tapes of Baylor. Like, I'm tired of it, which is great, but they're grainy and they're just, I don't know. And I'm like, man, is that what it's going to be? I mean, I was able to go to the San Diego State. They put on a coaches clinic, for the local Southern California guys. I went to the coaches clinic because they're going through X's and O's, but there's only one of me. So I sat through the offense and didn't sit through the defense. So I feel like I'm behind, you know what I mean? But to answer your question, man, I think that it's a very, very exciting year. And it's either going to be like the car crash on the side of the road that you're not supposed to look at, but you just can't help looking at it. Like Colorado last year, right? Like Colorado last year, it was like, oh, look at the shiny Lamborghini. And then it crashed and it was burning. You're like, I knew Dion couldn't do it, right? And then and it's going to be like that. Or it's going to be this beautiful thing that's going to pop up and people are going to say, wow, how did it happen? And it happened so quick. And now everyone's studying it and trying to figure it out. And we're having conversations like, is Sean Lewis going to be hired by the next whatever coach and all this kind of stuff? And so it just can go so many different ways. And to get to cover it, is a joy and a privilege. And so it's going to be a fun season.
Should be a fun ride.
Well, Paul, you got us excited, and football's right around the corner, and we want to thank you for sharing your time with us tonight and all your knowledge, because this is a team that we need to know about, and you gave us all the skinny on it, and we appreciate it.
Hey, man, you're welcome, and you have my contact. Let me know.
If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're listening in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.